and Development from Bangladesh, Dr. Poshraj Pandey, who is chairman of Swati Nepal, Ms. Rajat Tayyib Qureshi from Roshan Packages. Thank you very much all for joining. To officially start of today's discussion, I would request Dr. Abid Qayyum Sulairisa for his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Abdullah. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us on this extremely important session, Green Transition in South Asia. And I'm very happy to have our esteemed speakers from South Asia who would also be able to join their experiences on green transition in their respective countries. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as you know that there is a race between development and catastrophe. So if we look at the recent human history, and by recent I mean the past couple of centuries, so one can see a very clear trend. We are developing, irrespective of the fact how developed we are, developing nation, developed nation, least developed country, extremely poor country. So we are developing, and then in an attempt to develop, we are creating catastrophes. And then in order to overcome those catastrophes, we have to develop more, and we create more catastrophes, and this vicious cycle and this race is on. I remember a few decades ago, we used to think that environment is a luxury for very rich country and for elite people, and a very simple argument that was put forwarded that in developing countries or in poor economies, people, they have to think of 2 square meals. And talking of natural conservation, talking of environment is rich man's talk. So first we have to take care of our fundamental problems and fundamental issues. But over the years, one realized that as climate change, global warming and global boiling, so as the planet is boiling, livelihoods, they are getting frozen. So people's income, livelihoods, agriculture, so that is actually getting frozen. And in order to thaw it, we have to think of something that can take both further. And now it can be argued very well that it is not that first we have to grow to a certain level, attain that level of growth, and then we will start thinking of reducing our emission. But there are now areas, and there are, of course, initiatives which enable us to grow and simultaneously take care of Mother Earth. And this is what is the basic concept of this panel, green transition. Obviously, a question can be asked, and I'm sure that my distinguished panelists here, they will be able to guide us that who will pay this cost of transition. So while we are talking of transition, green transition, we know that someone will have to pay the cost of transition. And very often, if there is no strategy in place, it's the lower income or lower middle income strata of society that has to unfortunately pay that cost of transition. And when we talk of climate justice, when we talk of just transition towards green growth, this is one of the areas on which we need guidance and we need to get educated from this panel. I'm thankful to World Bank South Asia and especially the Chief Economist Office for joining us in holding this discussion. And I'm sure that World Bank would learn a lot from your very knowledgeable comments and interventions. Of course, IFIs, they need to have such consultation in order to take a feel of pulse of what is being thought of at ground level. And in pre-lunch session, this is what I was saying, that in our quest to have macroeconomic stability, we cannot ignore microeconomic stability. So macroeconomic stability at macro level needs to be aligned with microeconomic stability. Similarly, green transition, it has to be aligned with people's livelihoods, and there are now proven mechanisms how it can be made possible. And I'm sure we'll listen more over this panel. I'll hand over the mic back to Abdullah for further moderation. I will have to quickly jump over to another parallel session on poverty growth, where the chair, unfortunately, at last moment, he couldn't join us. So I have to fill in that space. But I promise before you conclude, I'll again come back and join this panel as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for setting the tone and agenda for today. Now we'll move towards Dr. Margaret for her presentation, please.
Can you hear me?
Over to you, Dr. Margaret.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you
Dr.
today
Margaret,
to discuss.
Am
Yes.
I audible to you?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
IT team, would you be able to address this?
Can you hear me?
Am I audible, Dr. Margaret? Yes, over to you. You're mute. You have to unmute yourself.
More. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes. Umer, you'll have to unmute her from here. Margaret, I'll suggest that you rejoin.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? My apologies. This technical glitch.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? If you can listen, it's over to you. It's your presentation's done.
Can you hear me?
We can't hear you. Okay.
Can somebody unmute me?
So it's at your end. At your end, you'll have to sort it out.
Can you
At
hear
this
me?
end- Yes, I can hear you now.
Yes? Okay, wonderful.
I think it's at our end, not at your end. Thank you. Now over to you.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to discuss how the energy transition might be an opportunity for South Asia. Next, please. Thank you. South Asia has renewable energy potential, and the energy transition is really an opportunity to lift productivity, create jobs, reduce reliance on fossil fuel imports, and also cut pollution. How can we do this? Well, one important thing is energy efficiency, and there are also labor market implications. So let me first get at the first question of energy efficiency. Next, please. South Asia's energy efficiency has improved rapidly over the past decade, as you can see here on the red bars in the left chart. Almost all of these improvements have been driven by within firm, within sector improvements. And so we see that South Asia has made great improvements, but we also see on the right chart that these improvements have not been enough to bring the energy intensity in the region in line with global average, or even the developing country average, emerging markets and developing economies. So here on the right chart, you see that currently each unit of output in the region is produced with twice as much energy than globally. So anything we can do to get this red bar closer to the blue bar will be good for growth. A lot of it is going to be in efficiency gains. Next, please. So this room for improvement will have to come from firms that adopt more energy efficient technologies. As it turns out, South Asian firms are enthusiastic adopters of basic technologies. So think of this like energy efficient lighting. You see here on the left chart, about 75% of firms have adopted this. This is much higher than the 48% average in other emerging markets. But South Asian firms lag in the adoption of more advanced energy efficient technologies. Think of this like programmable thermostats. Only about 7% of firms have adopted this, as opposed to 12% in other emerging markets. As you might expect, it is the larger firms that adopt more energy efficient technologies. On the right chart here, you see that larger firms that are more professionally run with key performance indicators and more educated managers are the ones that have benefited from this technology. Next, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the reasons for lagging technology adoption in the region is that firms simply underestimate the cost savings from better technologies. We conducted a randomized trial in Bangladesh with more than 500 firms in the leather and footwear industry. On the left chart here, we see that firms think that the electricity saving is much lower than the actual energy savings. We can compare the two bars here on the left chart. And of course, this translates into firms' willingness to pay. And we see here in the two bars in the right chart. But the real beauty of our our experiment here, where we gave a subset of firms this information, and this is information they can verify, right? So these new motors and also the meters that go with it. So they're able to see how much savings that they're benefiting from this new technology. Firms catch on very quickly when there are savings to be had. Once we installed the meters and the new motors in just a handful of firms, the news spread, and firms that are located nearby also adopt this new technology. So this policy that can be very low cost and effective is something that even a cash-strapped government can do. This is in line with what others have found elsewhere. So we see that social network matters. Next, please. Thank you. We also see that the grid network is also important. So there are policy options that can support the adoption of energy efficient technologies in the region. We see here on the left that power generators, this is a technology that's especially polluting and energy inefficient, but firms will not let them go because they need to rely on reliable power supply to continue to produce. So firms will not let this go unless they can rely on the public power grid. About 75% of firms in the region use backup power generation, power generators. This is much higher than the average in other emerging markets, only about 25% elsewhere. You see here in the left chart, about a third of firms in India and Bangladesh reported having suffered a power outage in the past month. You see here on the blue bar on the right. And we see on the red bar in the red chart that having suffered a power outage increased the probability of using a generator by about 20%. So we see that the provision of a reliable power grid really can support the adoption of energy efficient technology. Next, please. And cash-strapped governments can save even more money by getting the incentives right for energy efficient technology adoption. Most countries in the region spend more than 1.5% of GDP on energy subsidies. And these subsidies mostly go on fossil fuel intensive activities. In Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, fossil fuels and fossil fuel intensive electricity generation are priced far below world prices, that the effective price of carbon is negative, as you see here on the left chart. So what else can policymakers do to speed up the energy efficient technology adoption? We did a comprehensive literature review of 45 academic studies that estimate the impact of policy interventions on green technology adoption. You can see here on the main findings of the 45 papers in the right chart. Regulation has powerful impacts most of the time, but we also want to be mindful of the potential side effects. So the side effects are fewer if it is market-based. In Gujarat, for example, a recent pilot of a cap and trade scheme is effective in reducing the pollution emitted by firms participating in the pilot by about 30%. Even command and control regulations can be effective once the side effects are managed. We spoke about the information campaigns. It costs little, but they also have smaller impacts. Finally, we see that a lot of firms complain about the lack of financing for technology adoption. This is something that the literature is finding, but it's just emerging. So this is certainly something promising for future research. Next, please. So energy efficient technology adoption by firms would not only be good for growth, but also good for pollution reduction. The left chart shows you how much the power and industrial sector contribute to PM 2.5 emissions in South Asia and in other emerging markets. You see that they contribute almost 1/2 for the region. The right chart here shows you that firms that adopt energy efficient technologies are also the ones more likely to generate employment growth. So energy efficient technology is also good for growth in terms of employment. And this job creation will really be needed. Next slide, please. Because as part of this energy transition, potentially a lot of people will be looking for new jobs as this energy transition gets underway. There will be winners and losers. Next, please. Thank you. About 1/10 of the region's workers are in pollution-intensive jobs that may be phased out as the energy transition gets underway. These are the blue bars in the left chart. The share of green workers are almost always below the golden diamonds, right? So the share of pollution-intensive workers are almost always higher everywhere in South Asia. Even in India, where 9% of the workforce are more green than in pollution-intensive jobs, we still see that these two numbers are very, very similar. Before we get into this, let me step back. What is a green job and what is a pollution-intensive job? Green jobs are defined as jobs with environmentally friendly tasks, so things like recycling or environmental engineers. The pollution-intensive jobs, on the other hand, are jobs that are concentrated in industries that are highly polluting, so high emissions industries. These are all based on occupational classifications. So These pollution-intensive jobs are very highly concentrated in manufacturing. We see that in the red bars in the red chart. Green jobs, on the other hand, are much more dispersed in terms of the industries. Only a third of workers in green jobs are in manufacturing, which is the single largest green job sector. Next, please. These workers in pollution-intensive jobs are quite different from the average worker. Next slide, please. Thank you. So who are these workers? We see here on the left chart the probability of a worker in green jobs versus pollution-intensive jobs and versus the average worker, right? So workers in pollution-intensive jobs are significantly more likely than other workers to have a higher education, whereas the reverse is true for workers in green jobs. They are more likely to have a secondary or tertiary education. These workers are also more likely to be disadvantaged in pollution-intensive jobs. They are more likely to be in the informal sector of the economy, and we know that South Asia has a large share of workers in the informal sector of the economy. Whereas workers in green jobs are less likely to be in the informal sector. Now, we know that workers with higher education are more likely to also have higher earnings, but when we control for worker characteristics, we still see this wage differential. So the average worker in green jobs experience a wage premium of about 7%. As you see here in the right chart. Excuse me. And these differentials are really a premium that already take into account worker characteristics. And next chart, please. Thank you. So where are these workers? Well, we see that some regions will be particularly exposed to the decline of these pollution-intensive jobs because of the decline in fossil fuel-based activities. So workers in green jobs are much more dispersed geographically than those in pollution-intensive jobs. There are 3 provinces in Pakistan with higher concentration of pollution-intensive workers as opposed to the green workers. Next, please. Now, these only tell us who these workers are, where these workers are, based on the current labor force. But what might the future hold for regions with particularly large numbers of pollution-intensive workers, or those with particularly promising green opportunities? So we look to history, we look to resource booms and busts in the past globally. So we analyzed 43 studies from the literature on the labor market impact of resource booms and busts in the past. So these 2 charts summarize the employment earnings in booms on the left and busts on the right. And yes, when we look at resource booms, we see employment gains almost always, and we also see a small earnings gain. But in regions with resource busts, as we see here on the right, this is where the pollution-intensive workers might suffer. We see a persistent employment decline, and we also see perhaps more concerning these earnings losses of about 2%, which is much, much higher than the 0.5 earnings gain during busts. So not only do we see a larger magnitude of poor labor market outcomes, we also see the persistence, sometimes even more than 20 years after the initial bust. So what can governments do to help both workers and regions adjust? Policies that can help workers move, whether that's across sectors or geographically. things like portable social benefits, efficient land and factor markets, good infrastructure like transport links, reskilling and mobile platforms, and of course, overall job creation. Next slide, please. So to summarize, South Asia has renewable energy potential, and the energy transition is an opportunity, again, to lift productivity, cut pollution, reduce reliance on fossil fuel imports, and perhaps more importantly for lasting growth is to create jobs. Even cash-strapped governments can speed up the energy-efficient technology adoption by firms, but we want to be mindful of the energy transition that will have labor market implications that will require this careful management of the pollution-intensive work. That's about 9% of the current labor force in the region. For more details, please visit our website, and this is the QR code for easy download. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Margaret, for a very detailed presentation. No doubt, I also agree, and I hope the rest of the audience and the speakers would agree that in South Asia, there is a dire need to look into a realm where we can focus on spurring investments in energy efficient technologies. So without taking much of your time, I'll move forward to the moderated discussion. And for the moderated discussion, I'll be requesting Ms. Maheen Rehan as a co-moderator to take things forward from here.
Thank you, Mr. Abdullah, for setting down the agenda tone and providing us the housekeeping rules for today's roundtable discussion. Thank you, distinguished panelists and dear audience, for taking out time from your busy schedule for this session. I hope you all are well. It's an opportune time to discuss this topic. Starting the discussion with you, Dr. Imran, in the context of vulnerable communities, what essential support is being provided to communities to cope with the adverse impact of environmental challenges and climate change? Over to you, sir. Yes. No, you are not audible.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Thank you very much, Abdullah. Thank you very much, STPI, for having me be a part of this discussion. What I'd like to do is to talk about green transition from the perspective of communities, and especially communities that we're working with at WWF Pakistan. We know that when we talk about climate change, it's a threat multiplier. It increases the risks that are already out there vis-a-vis the communities, and makes them more vulnerable, and hence lessens their resilience. So if the environmental situation is such that the community's resilience has been reduced due to lack of safe drinking water, poor sanitation facilities, poor air quality, as we can see in a lot of cities across Pakistan, then that means that the people will be visiting hospitals a lot more. They'll be sick. That will have an effect on their labor productivity. Children will be out of school. And again, so all of those things are linked, resulting in lesser resilience across the society. So what we've been doing recently, and I'll just share this example of two communities in Islamabad and Rawalpindi where we're working. One's a Christian colony and one's a colony of migrants that's based here in Islamabad. And here we're trying to do some very basic things, provide them access to safe drinking water. So when we had COVID a couple of years back, even as we were talking about social distancing, communities, especially those which were disadvantaged and more vulnerable, they were lining up at filtration plants, without any focus on social distancing, because that's where they could get safe drinking water from. To them, COVID was secondary. And this there's a divide here, and this is a divide that needs to be addressed when we talk about the green transition. So in these two communities, we're trying to provide them with with filtration plants, with rainwater harvesting structures, because Islamabad and Rawalpindi do get lots of rain, especially during the monsoon season, and also trying to address their wastewater and sanitation needs, because across Pakistan, 2% of our wastewater is treated when we talk about municipal wastewater. And in these communities, there are no, even the drainage is missing. So through a grant from the Australian government, we've tried to focus on enhancing their resilience, and we're doing that by addressing the environmental needs of these two communities. Now, once we've done that, we're hoping that they'll be able to become more resilient. You won't see women and children standing outside in long queues waiting for water tankers. Household income to the tune of nearly 50% during the summer months goes to accessing water, again, reducing vulnerability. And so this isn't a social safety net as we think of, but it is contributing to the social safety of these two communities through a grant that's coming from a foreign entity. Now, how do we ensure that the projects are sustainable? So in this regard, we've set up community-based organizations whereby the communities are gathering their own funds, so that once WWF leaves these two communities, the initiatives can be sustainable. We know for a fact that outside entities and not-for-profit entities do come in with their projects, but once the project ends, the projects fall into disarray because there is no ownership of the community. So here we're working with the CDA and WASA, the two governmental entities, as well as the communities, to ensure that there's funds collection and there's proper maintenance, and once WWF leaves, these communities can be more sustainable. We'll be very happy to welcome anyone who is interested in visiting these two sites. This is a 5-year project. We're in our 3rd year now, and we're hoping that by the time we leave, we'll have a good demonstration model that's out there that can be replicated across the country. Now, this is we're talking about climate finance, and we're talking about technology transfer, and this isn't a very hi-fi sort of an initiative. It's very simple to implement, but unfortunately we haven't done it. So and that is why some of us have access to water from the best water bottling companies, while others have to stand in long queues waiting for water tankers where the water has been contaminated from E. coli, and you don't know where it's coming from. So that parity needs to take place, whereby the most vulnerable communities are treated by the powers that be in a similar fashion to other key stakeholders. I'll just stop here, and perhaps we can take this discussion forward. But the very quick takeaway is that whatever we try and do, it has to happen from a community lens. So any kind of policies that we develop, any kind of plans that we develop, we need to ensure that communities are involved right at the outset. And unless and until our policies and plans speak to our communities and our most vulnerable populations, they won't be successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Imran. You have rightly highlighted that the environment risk make community more vulnerable, impacting the health, education, and economic well-being. And you have rightly pointed out that we need a sustainable water system as well. For next, I would request Mr. Tokir Ali Shah, consider diverse economies in South Asia. What are the key policy areas that should be prioritized for addressing the challenges of environmental pollution and climate change in this region, and how we can integrate policies to address them through green transition? Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for asking me such a simple and straightforward question. And thank you, SDPI, for inviting me. I'm gratified. Allow me to integrate your question as my response to World Bank presentation from Margaret Are you still there, ma'am?
She is.
If
online.
World Bank is still there, Margaret, I would like to engage with you as well.
Yes.
I thoroughly enjoyed and benefited from your presentation, and I think the question raised to me stems from your presentation. And there are many, many strengths from which I think I have benefited immensely. Energy trade in the region is a building block for energy transition. And we in civil society have been arguing that for many years. In fact, CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, at times we have called it as energy corridor. Our vision is that energy produced in one part, let's say in Pakistan or China, can be used in Bangladesh, just the way the energy produced in Nepal can be consumed in India and in Bangladesh via India. Therefore, the energy trade is a very important building block of energy transition. Second, I wanted to see more, and I hope there'll be discussion. If there is indeed an energy transition, what will be or what should be our target? What percentage of 1.5 degree transition or 1.7 or 2 degrees transformation will rest on the energy consumption patterns? I heard you that we are not overly efficient and we are not at par with global averages in terms of the intensity of energy use. So therefore, we need to know what is our response, what is our share in accelerated journey towards 1.5 degree. On the one hand, all of us are trying to arrest that. I was also very keen to learn, and I hope there are others also from MDBs, to see whether or not they have designed or they have under implementation any projects aimed or geared at regional energy transition. If so, that will require harmonization of standards, promotion of similar technologies, regulations, policies on subsidies, or repurposing of subsidies, or encouraging private sector investment from particular types of industries across the region. So when Pakistan struggles for a renewable energy investor in this country, so does Bangladesh, so does Nepal or India. And how is the bank, MDBs playing this role? Just to give you an example, a few months ago, Shell decided to close its operation in Pakistan because downstream operation is very carbon intensive. But they switched their operation for a good part in India towards solar. So they have committed almost $2 billion, if I'm not mistaken, in solarizing their operation in India. So engaging private sector from MDBs is something bigger than smaller sovereigns like Pakistan can do. So it would have been very useful for us to hear from you. And of course, curbing energy demand is a function of efficiency, also pricing, and technology, access, quality, and reliability. Last 4 or 5 things, such as reliability, quality, and access, are mostly very temperamental in Pakistan, for lack of any other word. But the supply is renewable energy, and it needs us to re-envision grid systems or mini grids. It depends on B2B business. B2B, business to business. I'm a solar or renewable energy producer. Can I sell it to consumers directly, even if it is a business level at the initial stage? And very importantly, from province to province. A province in Pakistan specializes in hydro energy, and they can probably sell downstream to others. So the key question is there a trading market within Pakistan? And then it lays the foundation of shared grid and energy consumption or production needs in the bordering districts of districts of Pakistan and India, as well as Bangladesh and India. So the regional approaches can be piloted, I suppose, in one way or the other, at one level or the other, at the district levels. For example, some years ago, we tried to purchase energy from India, and we could not because the catalytical switches were not compatible. And it was a small energy transformation that would have facilitated energy trade. Then other political elements also come in. But that's where the role of. I want to conclude. There are many other questions one would like to raise, but because of the time constraint, integration and transition both in green energy transition will hinge on shared regulatory frameworks, fiscal interventions, repurposing of subsidies that are comparable in both countries. And comparability is very important because if India supplies free energy to its farmers and their agriculture produce is imported in Pakistan at the cost of our own production, that's not level playing field. So in some ways, Indian subsidy in energy to the agriculture sector hurts Pakistan sector, but because of our food security, we have to import that, and I mentioned trade. So these 5 elements that I referred to are at the heart of transition to energy and heart of integration, regional energy integration that I mentioned in trade. So the question is, as a building block, what kind of institutional mechanisms we would need to have? A working group, a pilot project in these areas, or a series of pilot projects between IFC, Asian Infrastructure Bank, Asian Development Bank, World Bank. Can they meet together with the host countries to help us craft a vision to 2050 or to 1.5 degrees world, or 10% of energy bought or sold from the region? So it requires a lot of work, and that work is beyond the capacity of Pakistan, India, or Bangladesh and other countries. Capacity both technical as well as political. And therefore, I think our MD development partners will have a lot of responsibility to share the shoulder. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I agree. Energy should be the key area that we should be focused on, and reliability and quality is also required in this sector. And definitely creating trade market for sustainable and renewable energy on comparative advantage, the fiscal intervention, regulatory measures are dire need of time in the integration and transition of green energy. So, Mr. Bilal, how can household and firm adapt to climate change and protect themselves from pollution? Over to you. I think your mic is not working. No.
Hello. Okay. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Thank you to SDPI for partnering for this great event. I like how we've been changing scales, starting from the community to region, and now we are. I'll probably zoom down to national and subnational level in my response. So when you think of the green transition for households and firms, I would like to refer to some of the ideas of the Pakistan Country Climate and Development Report, the CCDR. So the document that was published last year by the World Bank in collaboration with the government of Pakistan, which primarily talks about the transitions in the food agriculture sector, the energy sector, and what are the priorities that Pakistan needs to make. And one important theme that came out from that report, which some of you might have already seen, is around strengthening of governance, and how it describes that strengthening of governance is aligning institution policies and incentives, as well as financing for climate action. Now, how does this governance aspect connects to adoption of these technologies by households and firms? We need to understand that whether it's adoption of a green technology or any choice that a user has to make, which entails financial implication, the primary factor is cost consideration. So whether it's about adopting green technologies or buying eggs from the market, the primary factor will be cost consideration. And all these users, whether it's a household or a firm, they operate in a national or subnational economy where there are price signals depending on how the the space is being governed. So when we talk about governance and how it impacts these cost considerations for households and firms when they think of transitioning to green technologies or building resilience measures, the first thing is return on investment, the certainty on return on investment. Whenever you're adopting a green technology, there's an upfront capital cost, which might be recovered over the lifetime of the product. But at the end of the day, you're still paying up more than you would compared to a traditional option. And to have the user needs to have that certainty that, their investment, whatever capital, the premium they are paying for a green option, they will be able to recover that over the lifetime of that investment. For solar, that's, 20 years a panel works. Unless and until there's this consistent policy and regulation which can give the user that certainty that they will be able to harness the return on their investment that they're making, whether it's a solar panel or an electric vehicle, unless they have that certainty, they won't be making that choice. An example in Pakistan's case is the net metering. After every few months or years, we hear the net metering rates are being revised. Irrespective of whether that's true or false, the investor sentiment is affected, right? If you're going to install solar and the state has the arbitrary power to revisit the net metering rates, it just changes your return. So that's one area that I think we really need to make sure the states needs to show that there's a consistent and coherent policy and regulatory environment where green choices have a certain return on their investment. Second aspect is the provision of supporting infrastructure. A lot of green technologies require infrastructure in place to be adopted. Example is charging stations for electric vehicles, mass transit for transportation efficiency, grid access for solar power. So in many cases, again, you see there is not sufficient infrastructure to incentivize the user to make that green choice. An example here, if you go to the transportation sector, is the charging infrastructure for electric vehicles. When you look at the transportation market right now, the manufacturers are responding very well to the need for electric vehicles. They're becoming more and more affordable, but the charging infrastructure is not, staying pace. And that's primarily because it is more dependent on policy and reform from the government side. So that's another area where, we need to make sure that for households and firms to make these choices, the infrastructure is there to reduce their cost of adoption. Lastly, and I think very importantly, is financial access. Particularly in the high policy rate environment that we are living through right now globally and in the country. As I said earlier, whatever green technology we are going to adopt, it has typically a higher upfront financial cost, which can be recovered over the lifetime of the project, but still it's a prohibitive barrier for a lot of people. Whether it's going solar, again, buying a hybrid vehicle, you're paying a premium. And right now there's not enough financing options available to facilitate that transaction. For instance, a household paying $500,000 rupees per annum in electricity bills should have access to $1 million rupees, soft loan or a zero markup loan to get a solar solution, which then helps them, to get rid of the energy cost. At the same time, it's a win for the country because you are getting rid of your expensive fossil fuel import bill indirectly. So I think the financing options also need to really ramp up, and you can look at it in any sector. I mean, I refer to solar option, but lease for electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. There's a lot of space, and I think the market is not really responding to that. So to again facilitate households and firms to make that transition, there needs to be financing options available to them to overcome that initial cost that is usually a prohibitive factor. So with that, I think I'll conclude. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Absolutely, you correctly highlighted that the governance is of prime importance from the perspective of household and firm due to cost constraint and shifting the economy towards the renewable energy resources like hydro, biogas, and solar. We have to keep in mind the point of view of investors that he have to maximize its profit and minimize the cost. So. Mr. MD Shamsud Doha, would you please, what kind of policy gaps and challenges that are hindering the green transition in South Asia, and how can regional and international collaboration contribute to filling these gaps to build resilience, especially from the vulnerable population, such as poor households, small informal firms in the region? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. And Assalamu alaikum. My name is Shamsud Doha. I am from Bangladesh. I work for a research organization in relation to climate change policy and politics. Glad to be here, glad to be invited here, and glad to be seated beside by Ali Tokir, by Sahab, since many long we meet each other in the conference of the parties. In relation to green transition, the word essentially mean that we need to transit from some place to another place. So when we talk about the places of transition, this is from maybe brown places or maybe from dark places. So from brown places, we consider transitioning from some energy sources like fossil fuel, like gas and other things. On the other hand, when we consider transitioning from the dark sources or dark side, this is coal, petrol, diesel, and other things. So in relation to transition, when we talk about just transition or green transition, this has become ever important issue in relation to climate change. I mean, when you talk about limiting global average temperature, 1.5 degrees centigrade goal, then we essentially need to transit from all the fossil fuels by maybe 2030 or 2040. So it's a kind of global obligations, not only for the civil societies, but also for the governments, national governments, to make a fair transition, green transition from all the fossil fuel-based economies to greener economies. But unfortunately, the narratives of green transition is only promoted by the civil societies, not by the governments. So it's a major challenge that the policy narrative in relation to green transition has not been adequately perceived by the government agencies or government departments, government bureaucracies. It's a main challenge, I think. On the other hand, when we talk about green transition, I mean, transitioning from the existing fossil fuel sources, I consider a kind of double standard in terms of policies. Double standard both by the national governments and also from the international stakeholders, by the rich countries, by the poor countries, by the developing countries, all are playing a kind of double standard role. For instance, if I consider the transition from dirty sources to the greener economies, we developed NDCs, nationally determined contributions, to show our emission reduction and implement those. And in the NDCs, we didn't included the green transition or renewable energy promotion and other things. On the other hand, the other national plans and policies are not green. They are 100% or even more are depending on existing power sources. For instance, in Bangladesh, we have NDCs. We have projected that we will reduce greenhouse gas emission from different sources. On the other hand, the mainstream power production policies of Bangladesh said that 50% of power will come from coal by 2050. So thing is that we are still considering coal up to 2050 for energy production, power production. But again, we are saying that we need to phase out from all the fossil fuels by 2040. So it's a clear double standard by the national plans and policies. On the other hand, if I look into the global scenario, that in last year, in 2021, G7 and G20 countries have increased their fossil fuel subsidies, I mean, almost double fossil fuel production and consumption. So they increased fossil fuel production and consumption, increased their investment almost double in fossil fuel production and consumption, meaning that they will expand their market. So this is not just production, but production also will have expanded market. So they will expand this market to our areas, maybe in Bangladesh, maybe in Pakistan and India. So this is also a clear double standard. In global negotiation, they are saying that we will, transit from all the fossil fuel sources as early as possible. On the other hand, they are increasing their investment in fossil fuel production and exploration. The second challenge, what I understand, this is regional politics. And also, when we talk about regional politics, that meaning that regional politics is often directed by interest. I mean, interest of being economic superpower or interest of dominating our countries by economic activities. For instance, if I consider the power production system in Bangladesh, we are not coming out from coal because we are buying coal from India. We are buying coal from China, and we are bound to buy coal and other things from India and China because there are many other geopolitical issues, governance issues, political issues. So unless we can reduce that pressure from the regional big economies, we cannot transit to our national economies to the green and clean systems. For instance, India has huge reserve of coal. India need market. China has huge reserve of coal. China need market. So for expanding their market, because they're saying that they will come out from fossil fuel by maybe 2040 or maybe 2050, but they need expanded market to other countries to export their dirty energies and continue, I mean, exploiting other countries in the name of, clean fuel and other things. The other challenge, Ali Tauqir Bhai Sahebji already mentioned that within the region, we don't have that kind of collaboration, cooperation, particularly political collaboration, so that we can expand the existing scope of promoting hydropower. There is a deal between India, Nepal, and Bangladesh is ready to invest and also import hydropower from Nepal, but there is a challenge that that power should go through India. So India is not allowing power transition through India to Bangladesh. So maybe India will charge something bigger that it will not be economically viable. So this is also another challenge, that the political system within the region is not that convenient that we can go for collaboration for promoting renewable energy and other things. The third challenge is perception. Perception means when we talk about, transition, as I said, that the political leadership don't accept this in proper way. And they consider that when we transit from fossil fuel to other renewable energy sources, then it will limit their scope of corruption. For instance, if renewable energy does not involve huge investment, on the other hand, the traditional energy system like construction of coal-fired plants or other plants involve huge money. So if there is a dealings of huge money, there is a huge scope of corruption. The political leadership and bureaucracy, they always opted to go for huge investment with the multilateral development banks for doing some corruption out of this. So this kind of political narrative and perception by the bureaucratic system and political leadership is not a help for just energy or green energy transition. I think I have covered most of the challenges, but there is also an opportunity, because we should consider green energy transition as an opportunity, because there is many opportunity, not in terms of only limiting global average temperature in the context of climate change, but also it offers clean environment, decent environment, and also human rights. Because when we talk about big investment, for instance, coal-fired power plant development or construction, it requires huge land, occupying huge land. So when government of Bangladesh, there are several instances that government of Bangladesh went for occupying lands, displacing smallholders. There is a clash between police and also smallholders, because smallholders are not agreed to leave their land, because this is their only means of livelihood. So it is also related to a kind of human rights perspective. So if we transit from the existing power structure to the green sources, then it is also a kind of promoting and protecting human rights. So we need to promote this opportunity so that we can challenge the challenges. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Yes, we are facing challenges to government level. When we talk about green transition, and there are challenges in shifting the economy from traditional fossil fuel to green energy resources. Definitely, we need regional cooperation and coordination in this journey towards the green transition. Absolutely, regardless of all the challenges you have explained, the green energy transition is also an opportunity for us. So my next question is Dr. Poshraj Pandey. How can South Asia improve energy efficiency and reduce its reliance on fossil fuels? And what role can climate smart agriculture can play in the South Asia green transition? Over to you.
Thank you, madam. First, let me thank USDPI and Dr. Suleri for providing this opportunity. My name is Poshraj Pandey, and I am from Nepal. Well, I mean, you have allocated just 5 minutes and you are asking quite two big questions. I'm not sure, I mean, whether I would be able to respond
Take your
I
time,
mean,
sir. No problem at all.
to those issues. Well, let me start with the first question. First questions that is basically on issues of energy efficiency. Well, I mean, if we look at available economic literature as well as empirical result, we find positive causal relationship between energy consumption and economic growth. But as colleague from World Bank, Amnesty presented that in our case, in South Asia, I mean, power generation is the main source of energy. And in South Asia, I mean, the greenhouse gas emission is quite high compared to global average. In the sense, I mean, if we compare in terms of per output, GHG emissions, that is almost double. That is energy intensity or emission intensity of our output is quite high. So that is the actual situation in Nepal, in South Asia. But again, I mean, if you look at available information, I mean, the good news is that energy intensity is declining over the period in South Asia. And here that decline is at the firm level. That is within sector costs in energy, rather than shift of activities from high intensity to less energy intensive sector. So when we talk about efficient energy, efficient green energy, then our policy should focus on incentivizing firm to use efficient energy. And when I say, firm, that also includes households. So here our focus should be incentivizing firms. But while incentivizing firms, well, we all know the creative destructions of Schumpeter. In Schumpeterian equation, that here in incentivizing and policy instruments, I think we need to focus on that creative part and underplay. I'm not saying just to ignore that destruction part, but I think we need to underplay that destruction part. That should be our policy agenda. Well, here what could be that creative part in our policy agenda? The first could be direct funding for the adoption of green efficiency. That could be, on both policy agenda, which could include loans, subsidies, insurance, or maybe other any kind of supports for efficient use of energy. For example, at the household level, energy efficient cooling technology, that could be, one area we can subsidize the support. Or maybe, in transportations, supporting electric vehicle. That could be another, area that incentivizing. And the second could be indirect financial support or green technology adoption. That could be our loan guarantee. We can provide loan guarantee, and we can also provide inputs, subsidies at the inputs, lower prices, and sometimes we can also provide indirect financial support, or rather indirect compensations to firms creating I mean, positive externalities from the adoption of green technology. That could be, I mean, another area, I mean, for support. And the third area could be direct, non-financial support. That is, maybe we can provide information, I mean, to the enterprise level or at the household level, or we can support in training and development of human resources. And maybe sometime, I mean, we can strategically support specific industries that can promote, I mean, our green energy. That could be another area. I mean, I'm just talking about that creative part of our policy. And the fourth area could be, you can adopt, I mean, market-based solutions. That is basically cap and trade scheme. I mean, you allow to exceed, I mean, quota limits, but again, I mean, you allow to trade, I mean, that quota. And the fifth could be open trade and investment policy. Trade and investment, particularly for energy, as well as for energy technology. I mean, here our previous speaker, they talk about, I mean, cooperation in hydropower. I mean, here I just want to add, I mean, two things here. I mean, here, if we cooperate in energy sector, it helps to have, I mean, better mix of energy, better energy mix. I mean, in some of the countries, coal is, I mean, major source of energy. In some countries, say Nepal, Bhutan, that is hydropower. In Bangladesh, that is, I mean, gas. So we can have, I mean, better energy mix that provides, I mean, energy security. And the second part is, I mean, if you look at the demand side of energy in South Asian countries, well, India imports energy from Nepal, from Bhutan, and it exports to Nepal, Bangladesh, and India. It's in Myanmar. And again, I mean, Afghanistan, it imports from Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan. And Pakistan, it imports from Central Asia. So whereas Nepal and Bhutan has potential and hydropower of, say, in case of Nepal is 43,000 megawatt, and in case of Bhutan it's 25,000 megawatts. So why not to trade, I mean, among us? And again, I mean, another factor, there is seasonal variations. I mean, Bhutan, India, Bhutan and Nepal, I mean, the demand is quite low during summer, but that's high in India and Bangladesh. And again, I mean, during summer, Bangladesh might be having surplus, or India, I mean, some part of India, they might be having surplus. And the same is the case between India and Pakistan. So we can trade. I mean, that's another, I mean, issues. That's the positive part. And here, I mean, I said I'm underplaying, and colleagues, I mean, you said, like, I mean, that's the double standard. But what I'm saying is, it's just not completely ignoring that destruction part, but underplaying that destruction part. And the destruction, I mean, that part, I mean, the destruction part could be regulations and standards that mandate energy standards. That is, I mean, one part. And here we can set some hard quotas for GHG emissions. And another could be, we can reduce or maybe abolish that environmentally harmful subsidies. That is, I mean, another issues. I mean, for all this, what we need is development of national capabilities for technology adoption, innovation, and also, I mean, monitoring. That is the prerequisite, I mean, for this in energy efficiency. And here again, I mean, state should play the key role, I mean, in these issues. And finally, I don't have much time, so I'm not going to address on the agriculture part. So finally, I would also want to add who is going to fund, I mean, finance this energy transitions. I mean, here, I mean, our friend from World Bank, Bilal, I mean, he talked about, I mean, funding at household level. But I mean, at national level, I think, I mean, we need to have some sort of innovative financing. And here we need to engage, I mean, the private sector to finance this energy efficiency. And a new innovative, I mean, instrument could be, I mean, public-private partnership, or I mean, green bond, or maybe, I mean, blended finance. I mean, for this, and again, I mean, development partners, so I mean, they should provide maybe support in financing in the transition of this green energy. I stopped over here, and if there is any other questions during discussions, I'll be happy to respond them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Absolutely, emission from energy is high in South Asia. We should focus on incentivizing the energy efficiency rather than reliance on fossil fuel. There are multiple sectors like adopting green energy solutions, as you mentioned, use of electrical vehicles in transport sector, and definitely there is a much potential in carbon market. We need to develop that as well, and finance is very important field when we talk about when we talk about green transition. So, okay. We welcome Mr. Hardeep Joshi, who is a researcher from India. Welcome, sir. So my question for you is that what is from India's perspective on green transition, what can be done to enhance the regional connectivity in this region? Regional connectivity while transforming our society from traditional energy system towards the green transition.
Thank you so much. So I have been immediately asked to join this. I was not much prepared for this. India's total installed power capacity at this point of time is more than 400 gigawatt. It means 400,000 megawatt. And our plans of converting India's energy basket more and more greener are very ambitious. But my one caveat I want to put here, whenever we talk about green transition, there is a very important thing we should acknowledge, and we all at some point of time realize, or we know it, that no energy is absolute green energy. So sustainability factor is very important. If you keep digging and keep mining for solar panels, or you keep making electric vehicles, as Pakistan, where I'm sitting and speaking, I was reading, and correct me if I'm wrong, till 2030 you have target of 30-40% electric vehicles. But if your electric vehicles are being, entire South Asia, entire world, if the electric vehicles are being charged with the fossil fuel, so there is no use of such showpieces, I would say. These are just, and Elon Musk, who is the biggest tycoon of who is creating electric vehicles, also at the same time projecting 40,000 satellites in the space. He has plans who will use AI to run driverless cars. I mean, this is running with the hare and hunting with the hounds. At one point you are talking about making electric vehicles. At the same time, you are also using AI and internet so much that you will emit as much carbon as you want to stop, maybe more than that. And we sitting here, all the countries, India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, have a common fate. We fight with each other, we abuse each other, we work with each other, but we are bound with a common fate that we all need to shift to greener transition, because we are facing the same consequences. Coming to a question with this little digression, India has, any big country has two problems. Our dependency also has on coal a lot. And even if we have got a lot of green plant installed, but at the peak time, if you see the graph, the use of coal is much higher. So this is the problem with all the countries developing economies, that you have to work on two things. One is your plant load factor. It means whatever green plants you are installing, they have to be very efficient. So it is a mix of solar, hydro, nuclear, and everything, which comes under, some parts are debatable. Some people do not take nuclear as this thing. Second is grid. Your grid has to be very efficient, because in India, mostly the coal is on the eastern side. but the relatively so-called developed part is on the western side, Mumbai and Maharashtra, Gujarat, and all these places where the most of the industry. So demand becomes much higher in west, but your all coal is on the east. So you have to have very efficient grid system also. So when you take these things, it becomes a very complex motherboard. So India has to work, and they're working very in a satisfactory manner in that. So is, I believe, you will enlighten me, in Pakistan also, in Bangladesh also, in Sri Lanka also. So these are the another thing you said regional. If I take, we have more than 20, around 30 states and some union territories. So every state is not as developed in terms of industry, economy, but every state has its own features also, like UP, which is considered a Bihar, considered a less industrial state, but they have great potential in agriculture. But again, you see, agriculture, it is also it has also its carbon footprint. So we have to. That's why India, Pakistan, all these countries did not sign the methane treaty, because we have our own constraint. So when developing countries give us lecture that you do not do this, we said you have done it for the last 100 years. So we also need something. We also have people who we have to bring out of poverty. So these things have to be kept in mind. I believe I have answered this thing. And if you have a follow-up question, most welcome.
Absolutely, sir. I agree that India is quite ambitious in terms of when you talk about the green energy transition, and we have to work on the plant load factor and efficient grid system. So thank you, sir. Ms. Reja Tayyib Qureshi, what initiatives are being considered for waste, in particular in terms of waste management and creating green job through regulating the private sector? Over to you.
Thank you so much for your question. So in terms of waste, we see a huge opportunity in Pakistan as well as South Asia. And, we were talking about green energy. And so I've been researching on that as well. And one of the main things that we can do with the waste, even wastewater, is create energy through that, through the methane gases that are already, going into the environment. You can use that to create energy. So that's one thing. I think that's a sustainable solution for now, because we really don't have any place to, put our waste in. So, I mean, I'll go through what the main issues with waste is, but at the end of the day, we see this as an opportunity in terms of the green transition. So, firstly, I had that figure somewhere here. So 50 million tons of solid waste we're producing in Pakistan every year. And 23% of that is actually recyclable waste from the statistic that I'm seeing, while 30 to 40% is compostable. And by compostable, we mean that it's already releasing that methane gas if it's not buried and it's not gotten rid of properly. So there's in the US and Brazil and even China, wastewater is being used to actually produce energy. So that's one thing that we could be doing, linking it back to the previous conversation that we've been having around energy. But in terms of waste, we see that the main issue, so I've spoken to a lot of startups. As a company, we also engage in a lot of recycling. And what the main issue that we have is source segregation. Whoever I speak to, that there's this a huge problem of people, like the waste that we are getting, it's already getting contaminated. It's not separated at source, and that means that there's a lot of cost that's associated with it, and a lot of losses that are associated with waste being contaminated. So that's the main issue in terms of waste management in Pakistan. So in terms of the rest of South Asia, I know that there are better examples in terms of communities that have gotten together to segregate waste at source. So firstly, so the last government did have the Clean Green Pakistan movement. That's sort of lost momentum now. We're not hearing much about that, but that did have indicators where they were rating cities in terms of cleanliness, in terms of pollution. So those sort of indicators are very important. We have there's a lack of research being done in this place, and then also there's a lack of legislation. There's a lack of intervention in terms of the government. So we see a huge opportunity here. So whether it's in terms of the government of the provinces or the municipalities level, we feel that if, for example, even 10% of the recyclable waste that's going into landfills, if that had been source segregated, that could have gone into the smaller industries. And how do we help boost these industries? It's very easy once that waste is collected to set up collection centers. There's quite rudimentary machinery that's required, a baler, a presser, a segregator, a belt, and that can really help recyclers and the recycling industry to boom, because we see that as an opportunity, not in terms of not just recycling, but also there's an equipment and industry linked to this. There's a chemical industry linked to this that could really come and facilitate a whole new green economy in Pakistan if we really just take these 50 million tons of waste and do something with it. So I hope I answered your question.
Definitely, waste management is quite important when we talk about sustainable and sustainability and green energy transition. So I would like to ask, we have running short of time, so I would like to request all the panelists to give their top 2 recommendation on the subject matter, starting from Mr. Tawqeer Ali Shah. Sheikh Saab.
Well, most speakers have covered so many important aspects. Let me see if I can draw attention to 5 things. One is that the coordination between sectors is very important. Climate change ministries are typically weak in all countries, and they cannot leverage. So they need to work with others like trade and commerce and industries and others. And sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, that coordination can be potentially across the international frontiers with the neighboring districts, which would mean promoting off-grid or mini-grid solutions at the local levels. Second is there is need for labor market transition. In India, at least 1 million people depend on coal. And I don't know the numbers for other countries. I don't know the numbers for Pakistan. But there are thousands of families that make their livelihood out of coal industry. And that number may be growing in all countries. So we need to retool them, reskill them, and help their transition, because they should not be the victim of protecting the planet while ruining the future of their children and their own livelihoods. So the transition has to be just for those who rely on coal. I believe there is a need for regulatory and fiscal interventions to enable private sector. The transition necessary will require investments. Many countries, I know Pakistan, do not have sufficient financial resources to make investments. And in case of Bangladesh and Pakistan, this is at a minimum 3 to 5% of their GDPs, and which is a very large sum that comes to billions of rupees in each case. Fourth, we need shared financing and policy frameworks, and they're not impossible to develop. Forums like this can do the pioneering exercise. The policymakers can meet in international forums, including on the sidelines of COPs, and they can develop policy and financing frameworks. And as I mentioned earlier, MDBs can enable that kind of conversation. Lastly, our development is oftentimes not very inclusive. Pardon me if I say it is exclusionary. It leaves very large percentage of population outside development. About 30 to 40% in each country are below the poverty line, which means that the informal economies are roughly the size of our international economies. In some countries, as in Pakistan, it can be twice as large. And these are the people who do not have bank accounts, do not have access to credit, cannot make transition to expensive energy. Renewable energy is still expensive energy. And their products are not safe. Their work environments are not safe. And we have essentially excluded them. And for their products to become safe is essentially accelerating our growth rate. So if we can help them access renewable energy, we are essentially enabling them to increase our present growth rates. They are very impressive in Bangladesh, as we read in papers, if these reports are correct. And similar kind of investments for the low status of society can help accelerate in Pakistan and other countries as well. Thank you.
For the next, Mr. Shamsuddin.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. In relation to recommendation, my first point is that we should consider just transition or green transition as an opportunity. Sometimes we consider this transition as a pressure from the global level because this pressure is to limit global average temperature to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So we consider this as a global obligation, but we don't consider this as an opportunity. So promoting the spaces or promoting the narrative of opportunity in terms of green transition, this could be important one. The other concern is that investment, how to increase more investment or finances to the green transition, because when we talk about green transition, this is also include technologies, and technologies require huge, investment. Unfortunately, most of the investors from the developed countries, including the multilateral development banks, they are not fully motivated for divesting from fossil fuel and reinvesting to the green technologies. So they also need some kind of reform to the investors. Some investors are considering investment as a risk. So national governments should provide a kind of risk transfer or risk sharing mechanism to increase more investment. The other concern is that we also can look into a kind of regional marketplace within the South Asian countries, because when we talk about market of renewable energies, particularly solar panels, there are many regional or national trade barrier, market barrier. Still, we need to pay more import tax for importing solar panels. So it increases cost. So we can consider establishing a regional marketplace with flexible terms and conditions so that market is, supportive within the region for promoting renewable energies. Thank you.
For the next, Dr. Poshraj Pandey.
I think, Chairman, to my colleagues had already given a lot of policy recommendations. Just want to add one. That is with regard to regional cooperation on energy trade, particularly hydro trade, and also cooperation on investment in energy, regional cooperation and investment, and policy coordinations among the South Asian countries on green energy. And much more importantly, that is the building a regional grid or energy connectivity in the region. I think those could be recommendations. And another regarding financing, we can have some sort of develop regional capital market. To issue, say, green bond or any other kind of financial instrument. I think I just want to add these things in the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just 3 points because we have less time. One, as I said earlier, I'll mention again that coal dependency we all have an action plan, but we have to implement it very strongly, because India as a country, 38% of India's districts, 284 districts out of 720 districts, they are coal dependent one way or another. So dependency on coal has to be reduced very sharply because, and especially we should focus on our coal power plants. Coal and aviation, I believe, are the biggest culprits in these sectors. But if someone is using coal for cooking, that should not be targeted as much the big coal power plants who are unwilling to shift to the clean energy. Second is where we can use this clean energy most efficiently. I believe it should be and it will be used in housing. So green housing code is very important. We are making our houses very inefficient in terms of energy. We are building glass houses in Delhi and Islamabad or somewhere else because we do not understand what kind of houses do we need. I'm not making a blanket statement. I may be wrong somewhere, but what I have seen, most of the places, the living lifestyle is not very conducive. So we have to be very sustainable to reduce our, and if we put the solar panels in apartments and in societies, in small townships, they will be more efficient because your domestic use will be addressed by these solar panels and these battery systems you can do there. You can't use, you ask the car companies to make, use solar for your car production. So in a small units, if you say, I believe that will be more easy. So it should be, you should bring legislation. And last one, bring women in forefront. Women have always, not here in metro cities, but you see in policy making, if you go 90%, 40, 50, 60% of our all Asian countries are rural areas where women have no say in policy. So you bring them and they will make a revolution in it. That is my strong belief because they are very intelligent. They work from morning till evening. So if their role is increased in green transition, it may sound little at this point of time, but I'm pretty sure with my reporting experience on field, it will work really because they are facing the real brunt of climate impacts.
Thank you. So just picking up on that, so I started off the discussion by focusing on communities and adaptation. Although when we're talking about the green transition today, it's largely been focused on energy. But let's not forget that the communities are at the center of our environmental problems. I mean, they're the ones who are most being impacted, not the people who are sitting around this table. So let's talk about environmental justice, climate justice, and social justice. The fact that we have access to safe drinking water does not mean everybody in Islamabad does. I mean, this is the most developed city here. So the project that I started talking about was part of the South Asia Water Security Initiative funded by the Australian government. Similar projects being conducted in New Delhi, once here in Islamabad. But the fact of the matter is that this should be a local problem to resolve without accessing funding from the global north. So yes, there is discussion around Conference of Parties about loss and damage, and in that regard, we should be calling out the global north. But when it comes to safe drinking water and clean air, is that our problem or is that the problem of the global north? So I think this is something that we need to account for. My very first suggestion is that we need to account for externalities. So the economists around the table will tell you, oh, this is an externality. The health costs that are incurred due to a coal power plant being in operation. It's an externality in terms of how the communities are impacted, their health is impacted. But why not account for that cost, internalize it, and say that this is the real cost of doing business as usual. And unless and until we account for those externalities, we'll keep going around in circles. We need to have a state of the industry report with focus on environmental issues. We don't have such a thing in Pakistan. Truly have a state of the industry report focusing on environmental issues as well as greenhouse gas emissions, and then that will be key. If you're not going to move out and start to address our emissions, we'll be forced to do it. So think about the carbon border adjustment mechanism that's being put out by the European Union now, which says that, look, we are having our corporations address greenhouse gas emissions, but those in the developing world are not having to do so. So hence, we're going to tax you. That will eventually force us. So why not get ahead of the game and address that? And in doing so, we'll also make our environment better and contribute to the well-being of the planet. And finally, there's that there has been talk about the just energy transition, but we haven't talked about the just energy transition partnerships where funding has been made available to countries such as South Africa, Indonesia, more recently Senegal. So in that regard, these countries went through a prolonged process whereby they developed their low emission development strategies. I think Pakistan is just starting out, but we really need to focus on that and make the process inclusive. Instead of making policies via consultants through one-off events, make them holistic, involve the communities, involve women, involve communities who have an indigenous understanding of the issues at hand. And once you've done that, you'll find that the policies and plans that you've developed are truly holistic in terms of their long-term implementation.
Thank you so much. I think I'll just keep it shorter because we've run out of time. I just wanted to talk about, as you talked about being indigenous to the land, I think there's a lot of learnings to be done in how things were being done previously. Removing ourselves from the capitalist neoliberal lens of imperialism and seeing what we were doing before, how we were treating the earth before, and how we can do that again as South Asians. And with that, I just think it's really important, to educate ourselves and educate everyone around us, but also take into account research and academia, and lastly, marry that with policy and legislation. So I think those are the three-pronged approaches that we need to take in terms of the whole issue at hand. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Given this is the last intervention, I'll ambitiously try to, identify 3 areas which to some extent capture most of the recommendations that are coming out from the panel. First, I think one thing that comes out quickly is the need for a consistent and coherent policy and regulatory framework across sectors for a just and inclusive green transition. Second one, I think the need for investment in infrastructure to enable the green transition and also bring down the upfront adoption costs. And lastly, I think, and very importantly, is financial access and inclusion, both at the macro and the micro level, to enable this transition. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished panelists, for highlighting pertinent challenges on green transition in South Asia. And we will definitely deliver your key policy recommendations to the relevant authority and organization. And apologies, we can't take questions due to limited time. So with this, our discussion session come to an end. Thank you, everyone, and the panelists and the audience who have joined us online and in person. Thank you.